This is part one of a two-part series I'm doing on the top 40 starting pitchers in Major League Baseball for 2026. I'm going to walk through these guys in as much depth and detail as I can in about a minute and a half to 2 minutes on each of these guys. This first part you're watching is going to be 1 through 20. There will be 21 through 40 coming up. We have a lot to get to, so let's get going. Number one is no surprise. It's Tarik Skubal going for his third consecutive Cy Young. He's an absolute beast, and the big thing that jumps out to me is he's pulling a DeGrom. If you go back to 2020, 2022 area, he was sitting like 94 to 95, and if you look at this most recent season, he sat 97.7 miles per hour on his four-seam fastball, posted a 2.21 ERA with insane peripherals, tough to barrel him, tough to do anything. The subtler thing that I find fascinating about him, though, is if you get really nerdy and look at where he is from a spin efficiency standpoint. So essentially asking like, how far on the side of the ball are you? Or I guess put another way, how much are you delaying pronation? So if you're delaying it a ton, you're through the ball a lot at release and you're very efficient in your spin. But if you're not delaying that pronation as much, as we've seen with Skubal over the last couple seasons or so, you're on the side of the ball a bit more and you lose some horizontal on your fastball. So his four-seam fastball dropped about 3.5 inches of that arm side movement. I talked to some pitching coaches as to why this happens, and it's a super individualized thing. There isn't really a larger correlation between, hey, your body's moving differently and you're cutting the ball more. But for the case of Skubal, I think it's made him a bit better. He's throwing harder, he's cutting the ball more. This has picked up some of his slider and curve shapes, just allowing them to sweep more and maintain that velocity. He's the best pitcher in baseball for a reason, and I'm not surprised that he will probably win another Cy Young in 2026. Probably not too much of a surprise that number 2 is Paul Skeens. He's the youngest pitcher inside my top 10 by about 3 or 4 years. It's kind of wild to think about what he could become as a pitcher as he continues to mature in Major League Baseball. I really like his righty approach. If you look at his heat maps, I love the fact that his four-seam fastball sits up away from righties as opposed to being like a pure outer third pitch or a more vertically up pitch. Now, it's partially because he's a low slot guy, but the angle he creates in that four-seam allows him to kind of grab called strikes up away. He's got the sinker down in, the changeup he occasionally throws right, and then the sweeper. This probably gets to my larger point that if you really want to nitpick, because we're inside this top 5, I could get really specific. You want to go third time through the order versus left-handed hitters. His fastball's kind of back up. I'm talking about that splinker thing he throws alongside the four-seam fastball. I think personally this is because the precision of his locations to left-handed hitters is a bit more centralized, you could say. If you look at his four-seam fastball location to lefties, it's more kind of just generally over the plate. Now, this works. It's a very good fastball. It's hard. It's weird angle. But I imagine as guys see it more, they just become a bit more comfortable against it. This is why he had about a 13% K- walk versus lefties last season. Is not particularly good. I kind of wonder if you're looking for like the evolution of him going forward, like what could he do as we're talking about him being very young? He throws the slider, and I think he's talked about how he manipulates it and it changes shape. I wonder if there's some iteration of him where that pitch becomes more consistent and broken into two purely different offerings, one of which is potentially more on like the backup cutter territory that some organizations don't like, but I kind of wonder if it would work for a guy like Paul Skeens. Regardless, incredible pitcher, probably going for a back-to-back Cy Young. The obvious picks here, Skubal in the AL, Skeens in the NL. Among this top tier of arms, most of them have like 4 WAR plus projections. Crochet has what you could say is probably the worst command, but he has some of the best stuff. And by worst command, I just kind of mean it's more average. He is a stuff monster, absolutely. I kind of love what Boston's done with him. They're an organization that's really heavily faded fastball usage over the last couple seasons as they've brought in Greg Breslow and some other minds, Andrew Bailey and others. And Crochet is a testament to that. He backed off his fastball a lot between 2024 and 2025. 55% to right-handed hitters back in 24, down to like 39% in 25. He relied a lot more on the sweeper and the cutter he throws. The cutter is more of like a behind-the-count pitch. The sweeper is not generally a pitch you throw to opposite-handed hitters. I do wonder whether these ones that have a bit more drop to them, if you look at the induced vertical break the pitch has, his is a bit into the negative territory. It's not slurvy, it's not a curveball, but I think that added depth helps in terms of it succeeding versus opposite-handed hitters. And he's also playing with a splitter, as we've seen in spring training. It sounds like he learned this at Vanderbilt in the offseason. He had a pair of change-up-y kind of split change shapes last year, but honestly, they were all pretty bad. He had no feel for them, was kind of spraying them all over the place. So it's fun to think about, okay, does he have another two-strike weapon to right-handed hitters? And does that vault the K rate up even more beyond the level it was last season? He K'd guys at 35% clip in 24, and it was 31% last year. The Red Sox are projected to have the best rotation in Major League Baseball, and Crochet's at the top of it. He will give Skubal a run for the AL Cy Young. I'd argue Christopher Sanchez is the simplest pitcher, maybe next to Chris Sale inside my top 40 here, and it's because he just doesn't really throw anything at the top of the zone. So as a hitter, you can just look down in the zone, but even though you're doing that, you're still not going to barrel him because he's a very weird pitcher. So he only throws 24% of his pitches in the top half of the strike zone from lefties to righties here, which is really odd. The average is around like 40 to 45%. Why you can't barrel him is a great question. I imagine there's just something odd with his body. He's a 6'6" dude. He's got a very low arm angle, and yet his release height, so that point in space he's releasing the ball from, is higher than you would normally see from guys with as low of an arm angle as he has. Because, again, the fact that he's really tall and he gets down the mound well. So he's got a really odd combination of factors in terms of how he throws the ball. And he's throwing stuff down in the zone, and you're just not going to be able to barrel him. It's just such a weird look. He came from the Rays organization. I wouldn't say he was too much of like a pitching prospect, but he very much has stormed onto the scene. He's run a sub 6% barrel rate, which is basically reliever territory for a starting pitcher. The other guys that line up with that, Hunter Brown, Paul Skeens, Blake Snell, Ranger Suarez, and of course Christopher Sanchez, as I just mentioned. So it's a really odd innate trait that he has. There's been rumblings of like, maybe someday he'll throw a cutter. I don't necessarily think he needs it. I think he just needs to continue doing exactly what he's doing, and he'll probably have another incredible season. George Kirby looked very different after coming back from shoulder inflammation last season. He only threw 126 innings, and his arm angle was down 10 degrees. Anything outside of like a 5-degree variance in season or even season to season is something I like kind of take note of. 10 degrees is a ton. Was it a byproduct of the shoulder inflammation? I imagine the effect is that the four seam and the sinker kind of took a hit from a grading standpoint. The four seam in particular really took the bigger hit here because his slot's lower, so he's just not able to get the same amount of ride and carry. Despite the fact the approach angle of the pitch was actually a bit flatter, it just didn't fare as well versus left-handed hitters. So you had this guy in the past who was dominating with fastballs. Now he's got a lower slot, and we've seen in spring, or at least we've heard, that he's working on a cutter and he's working on a new splitter. To me, those are a pair of weapons that will help him versus left-handed hitters. So we're now seeing an iteration of Kirby, I think. A little bit more sweep on the slider. Sinker looks a bit better. That's the righty approach, perhaps a bit different than the old days of a lot more four-seam. And then versus lefties, can he play like this top rail 3 fastball game where he throws sinker front hip in, he also throws that up away, then he could vert the four-seam up, then he can also throw like a pitch on the upper inner third to lefties. It's a very weird approach. You mix that in with a split and a curveball down in the zone. I really like Kirby. I'm not totally concerned with the injury he had early, given the fact he posted a bunch of innings after. So I'm very high on him in 2026. Dodger pitchers are very difficult to rank. They're playing for October every season. As a result of that, if a guy goes down with something small in the middle of the year, they're probably going to slow play that, bring him back in an extended period of time. They don't want their guys peaking in July. It doesn't matter to them. Maybe an Emmett Sheehan or a River Ryan's okay with that, but these big dogs, the Snell, the Yamamoto, the Glasnows of the world, they want those guys peaking in October. As a result of that, it's hard from an inning standpoint to really nail where Yamamoto is, especially given the fact there isn't a massive amount of strikeout upside here. Now I'm saying this and he's still inside the top 12 or so for me as a pitcher. I still really like him. I also really like what he did to right-handed hitters, what he adjusted from 24 to 25, pulled down the four-seam fastball, which is a good pitch, but it's more reliant on command, really started hammering more sinker cutter to righties. That's a great approach. I love his splitter as well. It's a 2-strike weapon that is basically untouchable to either handedness of hitter. We'd call that like a very platoon neutral pitch. It's a weapon. He uses it a ton very smartly. We saw in the playoffs him playing with some of the usage as he went through the Blue Jays lineup as well. He's a very fun pitcher. It's plus command here. Fangraphs Location Plus has him at 110, which I believe is top 4 among starting pitchers that qualified last season. You're betting on command, you're betting on health here, and him getting to like 160 innings, maybe slightly capped from the strikeouts, but there's no way he falls out of the top 15 if he gets to that 160 threshold for me. The Yankees are one of the best teams from a pitching development standpoint, and they absolutely nailed Max Fried last season. They signed him, and immediately seems like that contract will just be filled with surplus value. They gave him a one-seam sinker. They added in a true four-seam fastball alongside the cut fastball he's throwing, which just seemed like a simple orientation tweak on a couple things like this. The sweeper adjusted, and he was throwing it a lot more. He's kind of fascinating as a pitcher. I heard Eno Saris on Rates and Barrels say that Fried didn't go in with the intent of adjusting a bunch of pitches. It was more changing around how his hips moved. And as a result of that, the ball flight was different. And then they play with some orientation. So again, a testament to what the Yankees do from a development standpoint. Now, Strikeout upside is pretty much needed inside this top 10-ish or so window to fulfill this rank, so to speak, as I'm using here. And you could say the bat miss for him is a minor issue. The swinging strike rate didn't really jump. He's more like a 24-ish% strikeout rate guy. It's not bad, but for upside, we want more, in my opinion. And to do that, I would look at him in 2 strike counts versus right-handed hitters. He threw a ton of that vertical four seam that was new alongside this more cut fastball. He was actually better in 2024 in 2 strike counts from a miss standpoint. I like the curveball. I like the sweeper. I think the changeup's fine. The pitch that I kind of interested in as to whether the Yankees push it into this season, he has like this downer slider shape, doesn't throw it a lot, but in the past, on a per like pitch basis, this thing missed a ton of bats. So if you want to chase more upside here, to me, it comes through strikeouts. The floor here is really high, funky pitcher. The Yanks are one of the best at pitching development. I have a lot of faith in a floor ceiling combo with Max Fried. The old Logan Webb, and by old, I just mean like a couple years ago, was like a sinker changeup guy. And the new Logan Webb is one that now has like a 26% strikeout rate and is throwing a lot of sweepers, which I did not see coming. But the really odd thing with him is if you look at last season in particular, using more sweeper, the sweeper was good versus left-handed hitters. He threw it a lot early count. But as he got into deep count spots versus lefties, the net results of his performance against lefties actually weren't that good. The sweeper was not great versus righties, but he was pretty good from a swing and miss standpoint overall versus righties because he added in this four seam and started throwing more cutter in 2025. So you have this odd inverse correlation with the sweeper usage relative to his success versus that specific handedness. It's a very long way to say he's a confusing pitcher who I think had some oddities last year. And I guess as a result of that, very easy things to attack from a development standpoint entering the offseason. Get yourself a 2-strike weapon to lefties that you could put guys away with more reliably. Play around early count with righties, maybe on this sinker and the cutter, such that you can get to the sweeper late. That was really good. He's just such a horse from an innings standpoint. It's really hard to keep him outside of your like top 12 to 15, I would say, overall. And I have him again right in that window. He puts up innings. You can now project a slightly bigger K rate because of the peripheral stuff we've seen. He's a horse. Before we get to number 9, I wanted to shout out my Substack, which has grown a ton over the last couple of years. This season, I'm putting it almost entirely behind the paywall, $5 a month, $30 for the entire season. There's a 7-day free trial if you don't believe that it's great content. But if you've gotten into this video and enjoyed this analysis, it's very much what I do on a near daily basis in season. Pretty much every night, I'm ripping through box scores, trying to find out what guys are adjusting, what I like, what I don't like. And there's also some really fun goodies inside of it. I do a top 40 pitching prospect rank, college pitcher analysis with some data on that. I'm doing a system overview from a pitching development standpoint, which might already be out on my Substack actually by the time I'm posting this video. And I hope you enjoy it. Click the link in the video description if you're already a sub. I appreciate it. If not, you should check it out. New team for Dylan Cease, big contract, goes to Toronto. Interesting pitcher. Last year, he was like the obvious, this guy's going to bounce back after a really bad first half. I think he was around like a 4.9 ERA. And he was better in the second half, but I wouldn't say he like bounced back as much as we expected. His peripherals were really good last year, so projection systems are going to go, hey, the things you control as a pitcher, we think those are more reliable from a projection standpoint. So for the most part, we think you're a top 15 pitcher in baseball. And I mostly agree with that. The angle that I find most interesting, he hasn't historically been great versus left-handed hitters. Now, a lot of righties just dominate righties and then are okay versus lefties. But I often think that upside is captured when you're able to take what you don't do well and make it better. And with Cease, there's some interesting overlap with the Blue Jays, who throw a bunch of splitters and changeups in the minors in particular. And we also saw this in the major leagues as well. They, I believe, had the highest split usage in baseball last season. Not totally surprising. Cease has had this really dumb troll changeup thing that is just way too slow, I think, for how hard he throws. He's one of the hardest throwing pitchers in baseball. Now, sometimes these guys just can't get to arm side fade. We saw this with Tyler Glasnow. He's just never been able to throw a good changeup. Maybe that's the same case with Dylan Cease. I have some faith the Blue Jays figure it out, and he's more of like an average guy in 2-strike counts versus left-handed hitters. So if you want to dream on better results versus lefties on a package that already dominates righties and it comes through that changeup, I love the upside here as well. So high floor arm, really nice upside, big contract. I hope he could pay it off. Flexor injury for Logan Gilbert last season. That's often a precursor to Tommy John. Does that impede the innings projection here? I think it does slightly. How much is a great question, because on a per inning basis, he's a fantastic pitcher. I sometimes say with guys like this, if you don't spin the ball well, he's got actually pretty terrible spin rates. You got to do a couple things really odd, or you just have to throw incredibly hard. This is kind of like the Roki Sasaki problem to some extent as well. He's throwing hard, doesn't really do anything odd though. Gilbert has a nice combination of both those factors. It's a massive extension down the mound. He is throwing hard, despite the fact his velo did tick down slightly from 2024, perhaps a byproduct of the flexure stuff we're talking about. So there's obviously some concern around this profile, but again, on a per inning basis, I think he's just a fantastic pitcher. He does a lot of things very oddly. And the super weird thing is that his strikeout rate jumped last season, but from an underlying data standpoint, it's not as supported. You look at a guy like Logan Webb I was talking about earlier, I kind of believe the strikeout rate jumped more because we saw a change in approach. Gilbert's swinging strike rate jumped up, but not enough to justify like a 32% strikeout rate, which is what he had. He's always been more in like the 25% area. The splitter is one of the best splitters in all of baseball per Stuff Plus. That pitch, again, is generally platoon neutral, so you could throw it to lefties and righties, have a bunch of success with it. It's very like gyro-y split. It's fun out of hand. And again, how much extension and oddity he has down the mound, I think really helps him. I would say I'm cautiously optimistic on a guy like Gilbert, and I'm accepting of the fact that there's some implosion risk here. And I guess if he implodes, maybe we'll see Kate Anderson for the Mariners, which would be a lot of fun. We got 172 innings of Jacob deGrom last season, and it was fantastic. Sure, he was sitting at a lower velocity, but it was still 97 plus. Incredibly fun pitcher to watch. Does a lot of things well from a release angle standpoint, really flat approach, four-seam fastball. I've always thought that the velocity and command combination for him is really what stands out more than anything. He's a very fun pitcher. Now, we're trying to think of like future versions of him. Last year, good results. The Rangers ballpark, Globe Life, was incredibly pitcher friendly. No one seems to know why. There's some speculation it was due to like a garage door being open, causing wind in the stadium or something absolutely insane. Does that get corrected and it's more of an average park, and does that hurt him a bit? Perhaps, but I would say the big thing for him to focus on, I still have him as like a top 20 pitcher, so he's a very good pitcher and I like him a lot heading into the season. He doesn't throw anything on the inner third of the plate to right-handed hitters. And sure, that worked for the majority of his career when he was throwing 99. I think down at 97, he has to add another wrinkle, and I think that will come in the form of a sinker. Kind of expecting this. I wrote about it in my Substack. It just makes a lot of sense for him. Historically, if you look between 2021 and 2024, he only threw about 1,000 pitches. He had a 40% strikeout minus walk versus right-handed hitters and a 1 skills independent ERA or Sierra. You go to last season, that got cut in half to 20%, and the Sierra jumped to like 3.2. Again, still very strong. But when we're inside this like top 15, 20 area with pitchers, I want to be really critical and figure out how they can be top 5 guys again. And for deGrom, I think that comes through the righty approach. And I'm confident he could figure it out, specifically because we saw last season a little more tolerance for curveball and changeup. He's got to evolve, and I think he is evolving, and perhaps he understands that. So I like him heading into this year. I just want to see some more adjustment for him to really get back to the old deGrom that we all know and love. Luzardo's actually ranked as having the best command from a location plus standpoint among all qualified pitchers last season, which is really impressive. Not necessarily someone off the top of my head I immediately go to when I think command artists in baseball, but he did a great job. Incredible peripherals. He had 2 starts where he allowed like 20 earned runs. I think that was related to tipping. The big adjustment here is that his arm angle's fallen slightly over time, and as a result of that, or perhaps connected to it, it seems like he's on the side of the ball more, that concept of cut that I was talking about a bit with Tarek Skubal at the beginning here. And it seems like the Phillies went, hey, we actually think you could throw a really good sweeper. That started to replace the slider and became his best pitch by a lot last season. Incredible offering. I think the Phillies do a really good job at the major league level from a pitching development standpoint with Caleb Cotham. I constantly see with Zach Wheeler and these other guys, them making like small adjustments to stay ahead of success in prior seasons. You know, Wheeler added a split, he added a sweeper, despite the fact you would look at those guys from a development plan standpoint and not see like a red flag where you go, oh my God, he needs to adjust this. And it seems like they're at it again with Luzardo here. I saw an article that he's talking about playing around with a different changeup grip because he wants the ball to fly more consistently. Now, that pitch wasn't a massive part of his repertoire, but it was sneakily more like a behind-in-count pitch to right-handed hitters because he could command it. So if there's an iteration of this pitch where they think that sweeper won't be as successful in 2026, therefore he needs another like 2-strike pitch and they want the changeup to be that alongside the sweeper, I could see him sustaining a lot of the success he had. So the path to me to copy pasting what he did in 25 is perhaps a bit clearer, or at least I found it and I'm using some of my bias to confirm it, than I have with other guys who I'm trying to figure out how they're going to be as good as they were last season in 2026. Not a ton to say about Chris Sale. With guys this old, I'm always just trying to figure out when they're going to kind of collapse and fall off. Sale's presented a nicer injury track record than guys like, say, Verlander or Scherzer prior to completely collapsing. So I don't necessarily think it's going to be this year for him. And given my rank, I'm not expecting it to be this season. The thing that I don't think public data totally captures about him is how crossfire he is, and perhaps the visual that creates for a right-handed hitter from like a how do you view the body of him, given the fact that his numbers are like literally looking at you, compared to other pitchers who maybe aren't necessarily as crossfire and they're more linear or direct to the plate. The slider horizontal approach into the zone, so how sharply that pitch kind of cuts in on your hands as a right-handed hitter, is also really sharp relative to other pitches in baseball and even relative to other sweepers, despite the fact he's not throwing like a massive, crazy sweeper like a Nolan McLean or a Michael King. It's actually like a shorter sweeper, doesn't have a ton of lateral movement, has a bunch of down action to it, which I think helps towards opposite-handed hitters like it does for a guy like Garrett Crochet. He's a weird pitcher. He's done it for long enough where it's really hard to doubt it. It's just one of those things is like, okay, is it this year, next year, or the year after where it all collapses? I just don't think it's going to be this season. Like Logan Webb, Framber Valdez is a horse, and as a result of that, it's hard to keep him outside of a strong projection unless you're really shaving the innings off or really regressing his peripherals, which I find it difficult to do given his track record of success, now going to pitch at a park that's relatively pitcher-friendly. He's an odd guy. The release here, we're talking about Chris Sale being like very far towards the third base side. Framber's the opposite. It's like an average arm angle, but he's very over towards the third base side, such that the point in space he's throwing from is a bit more centralized over the rubber. I think I had down here. So it's further, that point in space is further towards the third base than 94% of left-handed pitchers. It's in that realm of like Matthew Liberatore and some others. I personally think that creates some odd angles, especially for a guy who throws sinkers that almost look like they're going at righties and then drifting down more to the bottom of the zone. You mix that with the fact that he could spin a really good curveball. He's really hard to barrel, which I think is somewhat of a, I wouldn't say like an immutable trait. It's not something that regresses, but when you have enough of a track record here, and we could point to some angles, things in the fact that he creates more drop than average on his sinker for his slot, it makes a lot of sense to assume that the success continues. You want a concern around him. Last 2 months of last season, he had a 4.47 skills independent ERA and an 8% K- walk to righties. Not good. The main culprit I could see is that the sinker started drifting up into the zone. When that happens, it's just going to get barreled way more. So he's got to get away from that late season trend. But again, the track record here is so strong. New team, good park. It's really difficult to keep him outside of the top 20. I think, again, he's probably right in this area of a top 15 pitcher if he gives you 170, 80 innings, even with a bit of regression. The weirdest thing about Hunter Brown is that he's held around a league average walk rate, despite the fact he's not really in zone much, or he doesn't really throw a lot of strikes relative to average. He exists in like this Freddie Peralta, Gavin Williams, Jose Soriano area, where you don't throw a lot of strikes, but you can survive as a starting pitcher, and you don't really walk a ton of guys either. It's primarily built off chase, which Brown does a very good job in getting, and the fact that when you make contact with him, it's very hard to barrel him. That's maybe somewhat of a theme among some of these Astros pitchers, like Framber Valdez we were talking about. I think the four-seam location here is interesting. He's a guy that doesn't grade out well on the location side of things, but I think there's some parallels to Blake Snell. Snell grades out well on the location side. He just doesn't, he refuses, Snell does, to throw things in the zone in hitter counts where you're going to barrel him. And I think Brown doesn't necessarily have that layer of it, but I would say I think Location Plus is kind of underrating what he does from a location standpoint. He keeps his four seam, which is generally like a deep count strike pitch for him, or strikeout pitch. He keeps it away out of damage spots really well. And that sinker addition a couple years ago really unlocked him from being able to stay in or third and keep the four seam up away. So I really like him. The problem is just the lefty approach from a strikeout standpoint, a recurring theme among a lot of these righties. The cutter I love, grades out well. It's just never really performed well. And that is the only way I could kind of see the lefty results jumping to the point where you could stuff him inside like the top 10. And I hesitate a bit on that. So I'm not going to stuff Brown as much as maybe some others do from like he's a top 10 pitcher. He's got a chance to be top 5. I just think he's a very good pitcher, generates chase, limits barrels. And I think the floor is high rather than perhaps the ceiling being immense. If you're looking for a dark horse candidate to take Tarek Skubal's third consecutive Cy Young, on a per inning basis, I think it's Cole Reagan's 30% zone whiff last year is way higher than the 19% average. He had a 36% K- walk with a 1 skills independent ERA versus righties. It's Jacob deGrom territory for a lefty. He dominated hitters, but I think the key thing here for him is the four-seam fastball foundation he has is so good. So he's a guy that's early to that pronation at release, which allows him to get through the ball and create that ride and run. He has the most total movement on his four-seam fastball in baseball. What I mean by total movement is just add the vertical component and the arm side component. He's around 30 inches combined. You add that to the fact that it's a high release, he throws hard, he spins the ball really well, which is allowing him to create that movement despite the fact he's very efficient. This dude is sick, and we don't often see massive spin rates for these more pronator types. Usually supinators average, I think it's about 100, 120 RPM more on their four-seam fastball than guys who pronate like this. So I would say he's a bit of an outlier in the sense of how good his fastball is. That's enough to carry him to success. The changeup works off it really, really well. It's just the innings here, right? Like, you project him from 180, he's got a shot at Cy Young. He runs into another injury, as he's done in 2 of the last 3 seasons or 3 of the last 4. Then it's struggle to see how he ends up pushing into, say, the top 10. So I'm splitting the difference here. I'm keeping him the top 20. Per inning basis, he might be one of the best pitchers in baseball. I've talked in this video a bit about pronation bias, so that ability to kind of spin, run, ride your four-seam fastball, and supination, which is more on the side of the ball. Also guys drifting from one to the other. Gray's a guy who's drifted all the way on the side of cutting the ball. He's an extreme supinator. Everything he throws moves glove side. He has 5 glove side shapes: sweeper, curve, kind of cuttery downer slider, cutter, and then he's got a four-seam fastball that also moves to his glove side. And I think the Red Sox really like that. And to me, it comes back to what do the Red Sox want to do with him from a development standpoint. Path A is they don't really do anything. He continues to do what he did. The velo's down slightly. He's 36. We run into a bit of progression. The most likely scenario are subtle changes. To me, this would be fewer of that kind of cutish four-seam fastball. Really relies more on, say, the cutter or the downer slider for strikes, which is really what you're trying to solve for when you move off the four-seam fastball with guys. Like, what's the strike floor we can get to such that you're not walking 12% of the guys you face? The heavy fun angle would be if he just throws a bunch of sweeper, bunch of curveball, really becomes secondary reliant. They see some room for the sinker to lefties offhand, which would be a little bit funky. And that's how you get to the strike floor and also move off the four-seam fastball. So a lot of paths here. We'll see what the Red Sox do. He's right around this 20 window to me. Good pitcher. Again, trying to find the age cliff with a guy who's going to be 36 next year. The reason I pushed up Mackenzie Gore a bit relative to projections is that I really think teams like the Nationals and Rockies didn't do the best job from a pitching development standpoint. You don't really need me to tell you that. You can probably tell that just from the raw results. Nationals had like a 5+ ERA despite the fact they weren't pitching at Coors Field. The Rockies have a bit more of an excuse. As a result of that, I imagine when you take a guy like Mackenzie Gore out of what I think was a bad pitching development situation, there's a lot of room for optimization on a guy like Gore. And to me, that creates variance in projection and potentially positive variance. Of course, a little bit of negative variance, but just a little more skeptical that outlets from a projection standpoint are nailing the range of outcomes from an upside standpoint here. I would do a lot with him. Fewer fastball right off the bat. He threw 70% behind and count to right-handed hitters. That's absolutely insane. It's okay to walk guys. Think of Blake Snell and how successful he's been. You don't need to be in zone that much, throwing 70% four-seamer. I don't really get that. He's an easy sinker play too. Add that for lefties. I think he's kind of been up and down versus lefties in his career. Think of what the Red Sox just did with Peyton Tolley. A good example, add in a sinker. Probably not going to throw it to righties. Can use it against lefties. Location as well. A lot of middle four-seam. Again, probably just prioritizing strikes with the Nationals. I'd want to prioritize quality strikes, and I'd be willing to do that at the expense of a little bit more out of zone and some walk. Push the four-seam up, push it a bit more away, run it up to the arm side, and then add back this kind of cutter that he started to find at the end of the year. You have cutter, you have slider, you have 2 in there. Cutter could be more strike, slider could be down in zone for more chase if you don't want to use as much curveball. There's a lot of paths here for him to be a lot better, and I'm fascinated to see how he does. He's a top 20 pitcher for me. David Stearns gets his ace in Freddie Peralta. Big trade this offseason. I talked about him in another video. Really fun pitcher. I actually think he's kind of got like a sneaky high floor because of some of the release traits he possesses and how good the four-seam fastball is. I think that sets a really good foundation for him. The fascinating part of him is that over the last couple of years, we've seen him kind of back off this slider. He threw about 30% of this pitch to right-handed hitters in the past, and it fell below 20%. He really kicked up the changeup, and that became kind of the offering that allowed him to have probably the best season of his career. 176 innings, 2.70 ERA was really, really strong. I think there's a lot of ways you could play with this from like a how do the Mets make him better. They're very much like a 3 fastball team, as you'll see with a lot of the guys in the minors. Think of like a Noel McLean, even a Brandon Sproat who's in this trade for Freddie Peralta. What I mean by that is there's probably room for some kind of sinker in here if Freddie wants to grab that versus righties, make him even better. Why not? There's also probably a lane where the Mets figure out a slider orientation for him, or perhaps a pair where he throws like a cutter or a short slider and a bigger sweeper that he's actually comfortable with. This slider for him morphs continually throughout his career to the point where I think that potentially led to the fact that he wanted to back off the pitch because other pitchers are just more consistent. So if the Mets could find that consistency, layer in some other angles to him, contract year, a lot of incentive for him to be good, I think he's a very good pitcher. Hunter Green is my number 5. This might be a bit aggressive. There is a projection system that has him in this area. Most of them are more so in like the 10-ish range, 10 to 15 range with a guy like Hunter Green. I really like him for a couple reasons. One, I think the foundation of the fastball that he throws is incredible. He was throwing 99 miles per hour last year, up almost 2 ticks from 2024. This thing is in the zone a ton, and it generates a ton of whiff. There were only 3 pitchers last year who had a zone rate above 67%, and a zone whiff rate above 21%. Both those traits are well above average. It was Joe Ryan, Hunter Green, and the now injured Spencer Schwellenbach. So this is, I wouldn't say it's a unicorn fastball, but it's funny to think back to the days of everyone saying Hunter Green's fastball shape wasn't good, and what he did was just push the velocity on it and maintain the shape for the most part. He's got above average ride and arm side movement, which is really odd for the velocity he throws. Generally, as you throw harder, the ball just doesn't have enough time to move as much. So this is why you run into like, oh, he throws hard, but the four seam shape isn't incredible. You could also dream on expanding the mix here. And I know we've done this in years past with him where we're like, oh, curveball, splitter, look at him. He's going to be a 5-pitch guy. And he doesn't do that. He just throws like 90% four seam slider. But he does have late count splitter for lefties. There's reports this spring that he added a sinker, which I think is something he probably should have done a couple years ago against right-handed hitters. The problem is just that's probably not going to help him with the 12% barrel rate he allowed to left-handed hitters, especially at Great American Ballpark. It's pretty unforgiving. Those are my concerns with him, but I really like him, and I wonder if the angle is just to throw fewer fastball, despite the fact I like it a lot. You'll see this theme of, oh, that's a great fastball. Hey, you should probably throw it a little bit less because other pitches don't give up as much damage. But fastball foundation, you layer on some potential adjustments as he's now been in the league for a couple years. He's a top 5 pitcher for me. Thanks for watching 1 through 20. Again, I'm going to post another video that's going to be 21 through 40. I just figured I'd split up the videos because they were getting a little long in the amount of substance I was bringing into each of these. So just check out my channel if you want to watch 21 through 40. Might be a little more deep cut on the names. These were the big dogs. Fun to analyze. Always good to check in with some of the best names in the league. As always, thanks for checking out my channel.